Shumba and his warriors walked into the village as the sky bled into dusk. Their steps were heavy, their heads bowed, the weight of failure clinging to them like a second skin. The lion people gathered, sensing something was wrong before a word was spoken. There was no victory roar, no pride in their return, only silence, thick and suffocating. Leona stood at the edge of the crowd. She could feel it, something in the air, something dark. Her heart skipped, her instincts flaring like fire. She searched the faces of the returning warriors, her eyes moving from one to the other, until she reached her husband. Shumba's face was drawn tight, his shoulders slumped, the mighty chief looking smaller than she had ever seen him. "Shumba," she said. There was a question in the way she said it, her voice trembling beneath her steady tone. Her eyes darted around, scanning the returning warriors. One face was missing. "Where is our son?" she asked, her voice louder now, panic clawing its way into her throat. "Where is Paka, Shumba?" Shumba's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering to the ground. He couldn't look at her. He couldn't find the words. "Shumba," Leona's voice cracked, louder now, shaking with fear and fury. "Talk to me. Tell me where Paka is." Shumba closed his eyes briefly before forcing himself to speak. "We lost him, Leona." Her breath caught in her throat. "He's dead," she whispered, her voice trembling, already bracing for the worst. "No," Shumba said softly. "Babara has him." You are watching the Tales of the Savannah. Subscribe and be part of the tribe. Now let's get back to the story. Leona stumbled back as if struck, her hands flying to her mouth. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her, but her grief twisted instantly into something sharper. Rage, fear, desperation all at once. She couldn't decide what was worse, losing her son to death, or knowing Babara, the cruel, merciless king of the apes, had him. Her eyes, glassy with tears, locked onto Shumba's. "Then why are you here?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "Why are you standing here while our son is out there? How could you even come home after you left him?" Shumba's mouth opened, but no words came. The excuses caught in his throat, tangled with doubt and guilt. The words stumbled out, useless and weak. The truth was, he didn't know whether to blame Paka for his recklessness or himself for not protecting him better. "You shouldn't have come back," Leona said, her voice low, shaking with fury and heartbreak. "Not without my son. Bring him back, Shumba. Bring him back to me." "If you won't," Leona's voice rose, her tears falling freely now, "then I will go out there and find him myself." Shumba lowered his head, shame washing over him. He knew Leona's love for Paka ran deeper than the rivers that carved the earth. She would go after him herself if she had to, and Shumba knew she meant every word. Shumba's fists clenched at his sides. She was not just a mother. She was a lioness. Her fury would carry her into the jaws of danger without hesitation, and he would not allow that. He lifted his head, his voice firm, though pain still lingered behind it. "No, Leona, you will not go." He turned to his warriors, his voice echoing through the village. "Gather every lion who can fight. This is no longer a rescue, this is war." The lion people roared in agreement, their voices shaking the ground beneath them. The sky darkened, the stars beginning to flicker to life above, as Shumba stood tall, the weight of a father, a chief, and a warrior settling on his shoulders. One way or another, they would bring Paka home, or they would burn Babara's kingdom to the ground, trying. The air was filled with the stench of sweat, rotting fruit and blood. The sounds of apes snarling, laughing, and dragging their knuckles across the stone floor echoed through the dark chamber. Paka knelt at the center of it all, his wrists bound behind him with rough rope that bit into his skin. His knees rested on the cold, uneven ground, sharp pebbles digging into his flesh. All around him, the apes gathered in a wide circle, their yellow eyes gleaming with cruel excitement. They whispered to one another, each one eager to see how long the son of the lion would last. Babara sat high on his throne, his hulking form sprawled lazily, but there was nothing relaxed in the way his sharp eyes bore down on Paka. The Ape King's mouth curled into a cruel smile. Now, Paka. Babara's voice was deep, slow, and deliberate, each word sinking into the silence like a stone in water. Now that I have your full attention, you will tell me why your father is interfering with my operation. Paka lifted his head slightly, blood drying at the corner of his mouth from the earlier beating they'd given him. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp with defiance. I have nothing to say to you, he spat, though his voice trembled ever so slightly. Babara's smile only widened. Ah, he said, I was hoping you'd say that. He raised one thick, fur-covered arm and gestured. From the crowd stepped a towering ape, his muscles bulging beneath his dark fur. The other apes grunted and stepped aside, clearing a path for him. The air seemed to grow colder as the massive ape walked forward, dragging a long, coiled whip behind him. This is Mogo, Babara said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Mogo doesn't like silence. The whip hissed softly against the stone floor, and Paka's stomach twisted. He forced himself to sit up straighter. You will talk, son of the lion, Babara said, his smile fading into something darker. You will tell me everything I need to know. Paka locked his jaw and glared at the Ape King. Do what you want. I will tell you nothing. Babara leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. 5, he said to Mogo. That's all, for now. Paka braced himself, drawing in a sharp breath. His mind tried to harden itself, calling on the strength of Naraka, the stories of his ancestors, the battles they had survived. 5 is nothing, he told himself again. I can take 5. Mogo raised the whip high, his muscles rippling beneath his fur. The whip cracked through the air with a sound like thunder, and when it struck Paka's back, white-hot pain exploded through him. His body arched, every nerve screaming, but he didn't make a sound. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out the jeers and howls of the apes around him. Blood roared in his veins. His breath came in shallow gasps, and somewhere far away, he thought he could hear the distant cries of his ancestors. The second lash came before he had even recovered from the first. His skin tore beneath it, the raw sting sinking into his muscles. He bit down on his tongue hard enough to taste blood, willing himself not to scream. The pain was unlike anything he had felt before. 5 lashes had sounded so small, but this was different. This whip was not just leather. It was sharpened at the tips, designed to dig into flesh and rip it open with every strike. The third came, and his vision blurred, his body shuddering violently. He could no longer feel the ground beneath his knees. The chamber tilted, his ears ringing so loudly he could no longer hear the apes laughing. The fourth struck, and he felt himself break, not his spirit, but his body. His breath hitched, and a strangled sound escaped his throat. He gritted his teeth, but he couldn't stop it. The fifth came, and all he could feel was fire. Fire across his back, fire in his chest, fire in his mind. Tears stung his eyes, but he would not let them fall. He should have listened. He should have obeyed. His father had warned him, tried to guide him, but his pride had brought him here. Naraka's voice rang in his memory, a reminder of what it meant to be the vessel of the lion's blood, and the cost of failing that legacy. Mogo stepped back, the whip slick with Paka's blood. The apes howled their approval, banging the floor with their fists, delighted by the spectacle. Babara rose from his throne, his smile twisted with cruel satisfaction. Are you ready to talk, little lion? Paka's chest heaved with every ragged breath, his vision swimming. But somehow, he found the strength to lift his head. His voice was hoarse, but it held firm. No. Babara's smile faded. Good, he said, because I have nowhere to be. 5 more, he instructed Mogo. Paka lowered his head, his blood dripping onto the stone beneath him. He felt his head throb, blood rushing to his head as the 6th whip made contact with his back. He collapsed to the ground, unable to bear the pain, and there was silence. Back in the dreamscape, Lulenga lifted Akina's chin gently, tilting her face up toward his. His touch was familiar, warm, too warm. Then he kissed her. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a plea, a pull, a storm unraveling. Akina gasped softly, then turned her face away. Lulenga, please don't do this. Lulenga's grip was tender but firm, keeping her close. "Akina," he murmured, "this is a dream. It is not real." Her heart pounded. "But it feels real." "Then let it be," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "Indulge me just for a moment." Akina's breath trembled. "What about my husband?" "Please," Lulenga whispered against her skin, his breath warm, teasing. "Don't bring your husband into this, Akina." She stiffened, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Just let me have my moment. Do not utter his name. Say mine instead." She shuddered, torn between reason and the pull of the past. "I can't," she exhaled, her voice barely a breath. Lulenga's fingers traced her jaw, tilting her face toward him. "Please," he pleaded, his voice raw with longing. "I want to hear it. I need to hear you say my name." Akina swallowed hard. "Say my name, Akina." She hesitated. The battle raged inside her, duty against desire, past against present. He leaned in, his voice low. "Say it." And then, "Lulenga," she breathed, the name slipping from her lips like a confession, like surrender. His eyes darkened, his grip tightening ever so slightly. He exhaled softly against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "Again," he said. "Lulenga," she repeated, this time filled with something deeper, something forbidden. And he pulled her closer. His hands traced the lines of her arms, the curve of her waist. She felt tense. "Just let go," he urged softly. "Let me have you. If not in real life, then at least here. Please, Akina. I need this." She looked up into his eyes, seeing the longing, the history, the ache that mirrored her own. She should run. She wanted to run. But his arms, so familiar, so intoxicating, held her in place, not as a trap, but as an anchor. The warmth of his touch was a dangerous comfort, melting away the walls she had built over the years. Then he kissed her again, deeply, hungrily. A fire ignited within her, and she surrendered to it, just for a moment, just for this stolen second in time. She let herself feel the pressure of his lips, the heat of his breath, the way his hands traced her skin like he had never forgotten her. She shouldn't be doing this, but she was. Meanwhile, Jabali watched as Akina's expression shifted from distress to something else entirely. The tears had dried, replaced by a soft, flushed glow. Her lips parted slightly, her breath uneven, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was far too telling. Then, a soft, barely audible moan slipped from her lips. Jabali's entire body stiffened, but he watched, unable to look away. His wife, his Akina. Her lashes fluttered, her lips ghosting over words that didn't reach his ears. She wanted whoever was in that dream. She was feeling something, and it wasn't for him. He wanted to wake her. He wanted to shake her, to pull her out of whatever spell she was under, to demand to know who had stolen this moment from him. But he couldn't, because he was watching as the soft flush of passion danced across her skin as she bit her lower lip in the kind of pleasure that should have been only his to witness. He was furious, he was jealous, and yet, somewhere beneath the rage, something darker lurked, something more primal. He was aroused. He wanted to reach out, to slide his hand beneath the sheets, to take back what was his, but his fury was stronger. Beside him, Chipo snored softly, blissfully unaware of the battle raging within him. Jabali clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the blankets as if they were the only thing keeping him tethered to control. His voice was barely audible, a whisper only meant for the night itself. "I hate you, Akina," he murmured. "I hate what you do to me." And yet, he couldn't look away. Back in the dreamscape, Lulenga's hands wandered lower, tracing the shape of her hips, pressing against the softness of her skin. His lips traveled along her jaw, his breath hot against her ear. His fingers slid down, past her waist, past her hips, pressing lightly against her inner thighs. Akina's breath hitched. Then, "No," Lulenga froze. She stepped back, shaking her head. "I will see you tomorrow." His eyes darkened with longing, but he did not protest. He watched her, standing there so close yet so unreachable, and then she was gone, back in her bed, sleeping peacefully. The first light of morning seeped through the cracks of the hut, but the storm was far from over. The next day, Jabali sat quietly under the tree watching Akina go about her daily chores. There was something different about her today. Every time he spoke, she jumped. Every small sound startled her. She was on edge. She was guilty. But Jabali was patient. His anger simmered beneath the surface, but patience was his weapon now. He wouldn't confront her without proof, without something solid to hold against her. So, he watched. Later that afternoon, Akina cleared her throat, her voice slightly uneven. "I'm going to the river," she said. Jabali's breath caught in his chest. "It's time," he thought. He forced a smile, his voice calm. "All right, darling." Chipo, sitting nearby, also smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Akina went into the kitchen, grabbed a clay pot, and without another word, set off toward the river. Jabali was still processing his thoughts when Chipo suddenly stood. "Father, I have to go somewhere. I have a thing I need to attend to," she said. Jabali frowned. "A thing? What thing?" "Just a thing," Chipo said, her eyes dancing with secrets. Before he could press further, she dashed off to her room, grabbed her shoes, and ran out the door. "Who's going to stay home if you're both gone?" Jabali called after her. "Well, it's your home, father," Chipo shouted back with a laugh. Jabali shook his head, but his own plans were already in motion. "Fine, I'll lock up," he muttered. Father and daughter looked at each other for a brief moment. Neither knew that they were heading to the same place, both chasing the same secret, both wanting the truth for very different reasons. Chipo knew a shortcut through the fields, weaving through narrow paths that led directly to the river's edge. Jabali took the longer route, running at a speed he didn't know he could reach. Both arrived at the river, standing at different vantage points hidden in the trees. They could see the meeting spot clearly, but to their surprise, Akina wasn't there yet. They had raced to catch her in the act, only to beat her to the scene. So they waited, father and daughter unaware of each other's presence, both preparing to witness whatever truth was about to unfold. The truth that would change everything. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Akina's steps were slow, each one heavier than the last. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. Then she saw him, Lulenga, standing at the edge of the clearing, his eyes locked onto hers. There was warmth there, but also a quiet plea. Akina quickly lowered her gaze, unable to meet his eyes. She wasn't ready to face what had happened between them the night before. Not here, not now. Her hands clutched the clay pot tighter, though she had no need for it. It was just something to hold on to. Her eyes drifted past Lulenga, toward the base of the ancient tree. And there, sitting with her back turned, her long hair cascading down her back, was a girl, Kitapo. Akina's heart clenched so hard she felt lightheaded. "Go to her," Lulenga whispered softly. "She's been waiting for you." Akina's breath trembled as she nodded. With her heart pounding in her ears, she took one shaky step forward, toward the daughter she had lost, toward the truth. The underwater palace shimmered in the deep blue glow of the ocean's heart, its coral walls twisting like the veins of an ancient beast. Ziva arrived at the grand entrance, his mind racing with what lay ahead. He had faced kings, fought wars, and commanded legions, yet none of that prepared him for the one entity that truly unnerved him, Mami Wata. She was no ordinary queen. She was a goddess in her own right, ruler of the abyss, a force neither fully light nor dark. He had danced too close to her before, and the scars of that encounter still lingered in the depths of his soul. The guards eyed him with suspicion, but let him pass. They knew who he was. They also knew he wasn't exactly welcome. The mermaids hissed at his presence, their sharp teeth flashing in the dim light. The tension in the room was thick, electric. Ziva bowed deeply, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "Mami Wata, it is always a pleasure to be in your presence." A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips as she lounged on her throne, her body adorned with golden shells and woven seaweed as fine as silk. She tilted her head, amusement flickering in her ancient eyes. "I wish I could say the same for you, Dziva," she purred. "Let me think. When was the last time I saw you?" She tapped a finger against her lips. "Ah, yes, when you ran away from me." A collective gasp rippled through the court. The mermaids coiled tighter, their tails slamming against the ocean floor in warning. Dziva forced a smile. "My apologies, my queen. I was younger then. I did not know what I was doing." Mami Wata's laughter was like the echo of waves against jagged rocks. "Dziva, 10 years younger? Do not insult me." Her gaze bore into him, peeling back the layers of his carefully crafted arrogance. "You were old enough to know better." For once, Dziva had no clever retort. He, who had talked his way through treaties, seduced queens into alliances, and convinced warlords to bow, was at a loss for words. Mami Wata leaned forward, her smile growing sharper. "You have lost your tongue, Dziva. Strange. You used to have so much to say when you begged for my company." He cleared his throat, grasping for something, anything to shift the conversation. "I sent you letters." She arched a brow. "Letters of state, my dear. Cold, impersonal. A duty, not a desire." Her voice was mocking, but beneath it, there was something else. A warning. A wound. She sat back, regarding him like a predator studying prey. "And now here you are. I am curious. What brings you slithering back to my domain?" Dziva exhaled, forcing himself to regain control. "The war," he started, his voice steady. "The fish people are rising. They are coming. I ask for you to join us." Mami Wata did not blink. "I know. And how does that concern me? As far as I've heard, they're closer to you than they are to me. Why should I join this war? Maybe I should let the dust settle and then figure out what to do. I always bet on the winning side." "Please, Mami Wata," he pleaded. "I know I wronged you in the past, but I ask that you unite with us against the fish people. They're dangerous." "As are you, Dziva." Her voice was like silk, her amusement growing. Such a dangerous man to feed on lust so recklessly. He swallowed hard, his usual confidence faltering. "All I'm saying is, you do not know what they come with. They rule with an iron fist. If they conquer, they will not bargain, they will take." Mami Wata's eyes narrowed. She knew the danger. She was the queen of this part of the ocean, after all. Her history with Dziva was complicated, but she knew when to fight. Still, she wasn't going to make it easy for him. She tapped a nail against the arm of her throne. "You expect me to fight alongside you?" "Yes," Dziva said without hesitation. "For the survival of your kingdom. For the sea." She hummed in thought. Then, slowly, her lips curled into something far more dangerous than a smirk. "You will have to do more than ask, Dziva," she whispered, eyes raking over him. "You must convince me." Dziva knew what that meant before she even said the words. "Spend the night with me," she murmured. "Show me how sorry you are." His breath hitched. Around them the court was silent, watching, waiting. He shook his head. "My queen, I cannot stay. I have other villages and kingdoms to rally for the war. I was just passing through. Do I look like I care about your little assignments?" She dragged the word out, savoring his discomfort. "You will stay." She leaned in, her voice intoxicating. "We are going to have so much fun, just like old times." Dziva's jaw clenched. He had played this game before, and he knew the rules. This was no request. This was a command. He bowed his head, swallowing his pride, his nerves, his hesitation. "As you wish, my queen." He looked at his guards with a silent plea for help, but they just shook their heads. He was on his own at least for a night. The next morning, Dziva moved like a man who had fought a battle and lost. He pulled himself upright, trying to gather what was left of his dignity. His back ached, his legs ached, his soul ached. Mami Wata watched him with a knowing smirk, lounging on her throne as if the night had been nothing but a pleasant dream. Meanwhile, Dziva was certain he had seen death at least twice before sunrise. He bowed deeply, wincing as his spine protested. Mami Wata, it was a pleasure spending time with you. She stretched, feline and content, as was mine. She ran a slow hand down her arm, her nails dragging lightly over her skin as she eyed him. You kept up well. Ziva swallowed. I tried. Her smile deepened. Oh, I know. There was trauma in his eyes. Her brand of romance was pain. She didn't just enjoy pleasure, she inflicted it. With claws and teeth, and a level of stamina he had not known was possible in this realm or the next. He cleared his throat, forcing a smile even as his body screamed in protest. I must take my leave now. Mami Wata tilted her head. Must you? Ziva tensed. I must. Her gaze lingered on him, amused, and he could swear she was considering dragging him back for another round just to see how much more he could take. He swam backward slowly, carefully, like a man escaping a predator that only chased if you ran. Swim safe, Ziva, she purred. His entire body shook. He gave her one last respectful nod before turning and swimming away, his pace increasing the moment he was out of her sight. The mermaids whispered as he passed, some giggling, others giving him pitiful looks as if they knew. He had survived barely. And though he would never admit it out loud, he wasn't sure if he was proud of that, or just terrified. And that, my dear tribe members, brings us to the end of yet another episode in our Mermaids, Lion People and Witches series. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. In this week's episode, Shumba returns home to Leona, but without their son, and Leona is not impressed. She wants him to go back and bring him home, or she'll go and get him herself. Meanwhile, Babara has introduced us to the Punisher, Mogo, who is all too happy to take care of Paka. Will Paka survive much longer in the land of the apes? Will Naraka step in to help him? And will Shumba reach him before he's broken beyond repair? We will find out. In the Dreamscape, Lulenga and Akina finally share a kiss. But is this intimate connection in the Dreamscape real? Is this an affair? Is Akina cheating on Jabali? What Akina doesn't know is that she has an audience, Jabali, who waits patiently in the shadows. Much like his daughter Chipo, who is also waiting for her mother to slip up so she can finally uncover the truth. And what will happen when Akina finally comes face to face with Kitapo? She's right there, within reach, within grasp. Is she ready to meet her long-lost daughter? Meanwhile, Ziva pays a visit to Mami Wata to request an alliance for the upcoming war. But Mami Wata demands an apology, one she makes sure Ziva delivers in ways he will never forget. Well, what will happen next? We'll have to wait and see. Until then, stay wild, stay curious, and stay ready for what's to come. I'd like to say a big thank you to a friend of the show, Angel, for the generous super thanks. Angel also has a message. She loves the stories and thinks that Naomi might be part snake people. She's just too smooth. Well, someone actually left a comment about this before, saying they also feel that Naomi could be part snake. So tell me, tribe, do you think Naomi is part snake? Let me know in the comments below. I was also pleasantly surprised to receive a lovely PayPal gift from Known to Kozo. She absolutely loves the stories and is excited for more from Tales of the Savannah. I am truly humbled by your generosity and support. May the gods you hold dear bless you abundantly. Want to support the channel and become an even bigger part of our tribe? You can join for as little as the cost of a coffee each month. Your support helps me continue creating the content you love, but of course, just having you here is already more than enough. Thank you for being part of this journey. To those of you who have already joined the tribe, thank you from the bottom of my heart. You are truly the heartbeat of this channel. And as always, thank you for watching our story, and we hope you enjoyed it. What lessons did you draw from this story? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and be part of the tribe. Thank you for watching the Tales of the Savannah. We will see you next time in the Savannah.